Hey everyone, welcome to our special Patreon episode with, if you're a regular listener, if you're a Patreon member, you're definitely a regular listener to the podcast. So you're going to recognize this gentleman as a recent guest on the show. I invited him back to talk about something we didn't get to talk about in the show. And I want to welcome Dennis. Dennis, welcome back to this special Patreon episode of the From the Shadows podcast.
Shane, it's good to be back. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, listen, I know everybody that's heard your episode, they probably heard us bump into this subject of out of body experiences, and were probably screaming at me for not going, hey, let's go down that road. But I knew going in that we were going to save it for special. So that's what we call in the business chumming the water, right? we chum the water. So Dennis, okay, I'm just as curious as I think all of our listeners are. Talk to us about how these out of body, and you're going to call them OBEs. I think that's the standard term, the acronym, right, for out of body experience.
Like it is in modern times. Yeah, it's been called astral projection and other things, but yeah, OBEs is pretty standard.
Yeah, that's I am old school. I would have called it astral projection, but that's just because I'm very Victorian in nature. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway.
You may very well be. You never know.
Well, but you got to remember, like the books I read growing up were, that's how it was described, as astral projection, or not even, it wasn't really even called an out of body experience,
right?
In the text that I would have read, growing up and stuff. So let's get into it. How did you discover you could do this, and how does it? How does it continue on to this day?
Well, it's a lifelong thing with me. And when we talked before, I told you that my family were esoterics. So, and I don't know, if I was born into that family on purpose, just to be around these kind of people, or, I just happened to be born into that family who were a bunch of practicing esoterics. So these kind of things, this phenomena of astral projection or the out-of-body experience was a natural phenomenon for me, and it started as a child. And I'm going to use the age of 4, because that's the average age that children will start to experience phenomenon other than what they experience on the mundane plane, because their minds are not fettered as adults are. They're wide open to receive information, to experience things that cannot be seen by the average adult person who's busying themselves with everyday life and work and, raising families and whatever the case may be. So as a child, you're wide open. You don't have all that gross attachment, and you don't have that weight on your shoulders. So your mind is wide open. At about the age of 4, and this was a nightly occurrence. So I would go to sleep at night, and it was the same opening. If I caught it early enough, the process of the out-of-body experience for me always happened or played out the same way, and that was. I would be in my own city, walking down the middle of the street. And, St. Louis was built in the 1700s. So some of the neighborhoods, and I grew up in an older neighborhood, one that was really old, with cobblestone streets, brick alleyways. But all right, so I'd drift off to sleep at night. And I'd find myself in front of we lived in a 2-family flat, an old brick flat. but I would be out in the middle of the street in front of my house, and I would be walking right down the middle of the street. Now, picture this in your mind. Back in those days, in the 60s, we didn't have these aircraft landing light street lamps that, illuminate your entire city these days. We had these old incandescent yellow, low glowing street lamps that, like you would see in London or something like that. So you'd have this old atmosphere, and you would get this dark glow. Basically, it was enough to illuminate the street, but it wasn't, this brilliant white that you see today. So I'd find myself walking down the middle of this cobblestone street in front of my house, and there would be, now mind you, this is spontaneous, but this is what I experienced nightly. There would be a wooden door that would appear in the middle of the street, and there was nobody on the street. I was the only one out there. And I would walk up to the door and open it and step through. And when I stepped through, I would become disoriented. I would be, because my mind was telling me that I had a body, it felt as if my body was spinning in space amongst the stars, but it would be disorienting because there was no reference point for me to grab onto. So I felt as if I was spinning uncontrollably, upside down, sideways, but I would be floating or flying. And even though I didn't see the body that I felt that I had, it felt as though as I had a body, and this is how I was experiencing the phenomenon. It's a funny thing about your mind, because we're so entrenched in the mundane plane, and your synapses of your brain, fire in a particular pattern, a habitual pattern. You develop concepts, and you develop, thought patterns and beliefs and things like that. So for me to understand what was happening to me, my mind had to create something that I already knew, because the concept of, I didn't know I was having these out-of-body experiences, but I knew that it was different. I knew that it wasn't a dream. I knew that it was something entirely different, but I didn't know what to call it. I was only 4 years old. But I know that I liked it. I liked it a great deal. I loved it. When I was floating in, all right, so after this initial moment of being out in space, I'd find myself usually in an environment that resembled my city, or it could be another.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out. Go!